Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing the Stars podcast. How are my loyal listeners? Thank you for your continued support. And as always, hit that subscribe button, everybody. We have an amazing show for you all because board the mothership is Fritz Coleman and Louise Palanker. They're the hosts of the Media Path podcast. Now come join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Fritz and Louise. Thank you so much for coming to Traversing the Stars podcast.
We are happy to be here, Jeff. Thanks for inviting us.
So my pleasure, sir. Guys, I was able to watch your show, and it's fantastic. I really loved production value. I thought your guests were very impressive. I was quite envious of the guests you were able to bring onto your show. So thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I always start off with questions of inspiration. So what inspired your desire to create your podcast to begin with?
Well, I've been podcasting since you could. So this is my 5th podcast. And I've always wanted to podcast with Fritz, but he had a job as weathercaster at NBC. He's contractually not permitted to have opinions outside of storm systems encroaching. And now he gets to have all kinds of opinions. So he's a perfect podcast co-host.
How about you, sir?
I seized the opportunity. Weezy and I have been friends for over 30 years. She produced 2 of my one-person shows. We're on the same page culturally and intellectually. We like the same movies and books and people and politics. And it just seemed like a natural extension of our everyday conversations. And it's been fantastic. The production value is a little better than our everyday conversations. So we just have some fun and talk about what we would talk about, but bring in some interesting guests to sort of make the conversation 3-dimensional. We really like it.
So the name of your podcast is Media Path. And as I said, I've been able to watch it, and I think it's been, they're wonderful shows. Like I said, the production is amazing. So when you guys were conceptualizing what show you were going to do, how did you determine what the show was going to be and what audience you were going to look for?
We're sort of targeting boomers, and we have a talent coordinator. So we're sort of looking at that sweet spot of guests and topics that are meaningful for people in our age group, things we grew up with, things that you love forever because you love them as a child. And she kind of runs guests and ideas by us. And if it's a good fit, we'd say, yes, book it. And then we go about getting prepared.
So about how long does it take you guys to prep for not only, because usually how your show is set up is that you discuss current events at the beginning, then you go into with your guest. How much prep time does it take to, one, get familiar with the current events enough to want to talk about it, and then secondly, preparing for the guest that you have?
Depends on whether or not that guest has written a book. If they've written a book, then that's hours of prep because we like to read the book.
Yes.
But, go ahead, Fritz.
To be a little more specific about it, the name of the show is Media Path. And so what we do is walk people gently down a media path. For instance, Weezy and I will both have 1 or 2 suggestions every week of something we saw streaming or on cable or in the movies or a book we read. Not reviews, just suggestions on things that people might find interesting, like-minded people might find interesting. So we exchange 2 or 3 or 4 ideas about that. That takes up the first 10 minutes of the show. And then we invite on our viewer or guests and often ask them what their picks of the week are, if they have any suggestions, and just go forward from there. And it's it's a fun conversation.
Now, when you guys are determining which things to talk about in the current events section of your podcast, are you intentionally looking for a connection or bridge to the guests you're going to talk about? Because I know a few things that you talked about when you had Ira Shapiro on. Your current event did connect to your guest. Is that something that you attempt to purposely do, or that's just happy coincidence when that happens?
It's not intentional, other than if we've read their book. With Ira, of course, we had read his book. But if we have a guest and they have a body of work that, we think that folks could familiarize themselves with one of those offerings, and, we'll suggest that. But for the most part, it doesn't align unless it's like by happenstance. It's just whatever we've been watching or reading that week is what we kind of tend to recommend. We don't review things. We don't talk about things we didn't like. We just simply recommend the things that we do like.
So Fritz, as Louise mentioned earlier, you were a weatherman prior to being a podcaster. So what led you to the path of being a weatherman, and how has the skills of being a weatherman helped to translate to being a good podcast host?
Well, I got my job as a weathercaster from being a comedian. I know that's a wide arc, but it's true. I came out to California from New York State in 1980. And in 1982, I was a staff performer at the Comedy Store. And one night, the news director from Channel 4 and his wife were in the audience at the Comedy Store and saw me perform. And for a number of reasons, he was attracted to my act. On stage, I mentioned that when I was in the Navy, I worked for Armed Forces Radio and Television, and I was forced to do the weather against my will in the Navy, but they didn't seem to care that I didn't know anything about weather. And I told a little anecdote about that. So after this comedy show was over, I went backstage and I met this gentleman and his wife. And he said, I know this is an odd question, but do you have any desire to come to NBC and do some vacation relief weathercasting for me on weekends and as vacation relief? And I was making $45 a night at the Comedy Store. I said, when would you like me to start? He said, well, you have to audition. So I auditioned. I got the fill-in guy job, the utility player guy job, and did that for 2 years. And then my predecessor left, and I was bumped up to the main weather job and retired 2 weeks shy of my 40th anniversary at Channel 4 in Los Angeles. So I didn't set out to do weather. It's just that it was this beautiful opportunity that presented itself and gave me a beautiful and stable career.
And I would like to add that I think that weathercasters are underrated. I think that we just sort of take it for granted that newsmen tell you what did happen and weathercasters tell you what is going to happen. So
yeah. And even if we don't know, we say it in a very confident way, which is it.
Well, what I like is that you always say there's the chance of, because it's hard to prove that you're wrong when you say only a chance of, because always gonna be the opposite.
Yeah.
So being a successful television weathercaster is learning to suffer public humiliation gracefully. It's the ability to, having tanked a forecast on Tuesday, blown it out of the water, soccer practices were drenched, outdoor wedding receptions were swept away, and then to be able to go on the air Wednesday and pretend it didn't happen. So it's an interesting job.
So how did that prepare you for podcasting? Is it being just comfortable in front of a camera, in front of an audience? Is, as you said, the lack of shame when you screw up and do something along those lines?
No, I don't think, I mean, being a broadcaster helped. It learned you how to, deliver your voice on a microphone. And, but I just think the quality that really matters in what we do is just a natural inquisitiveness. It's be prepared and ask the questions that you think the audience would like to hear the answer to, and just put yourself in the audience like you raised your hand and asked this person a question. So nothing specific about weather prepared me for it. Being a broadcaster prepared me for it, because before that, I was in the radio business for 15 years. I was a disc jockey on top 40 stations. And so I had a little sense of, using your voice and all those things. But I think being a podcaster is just putting yourself in the place of the listeners and what would you like to hear the answer to, type of thing.
He forecasts what the listener would like to know.
I do. That's the gift. I try to forecast their answers.
So Louise, you were a radio producer and documentarian prior to being a podcaster. So what inspired that path for you, and how have those skills that you obtained doing that made you a strong podcast host?
Well, I grew up wanting to get into the entertainment business. I had no idea what the jobs were. That all when you're a kid is like actor, singer, and I wasn't really hitting it out of the park in either one of those camps. So I figured there's people. You watch the credits go by. It's like people work there. I have to figure out what a gaffer is and go see if I can do that, because I knew I wanted to be a part of it. So I moved from suburban Buffalo out to California. I knew that if you watch Johnny Carson, there was a page who gave him a card that told people where they were going to get their free meal. I thought, well, that, I can do that. I can hand Johnny a card. And so the job of page became much coveted for me. So I wound up as a page at Metro Tape, which was the year that I did it was all the Norman Lear sitcoms and the John Davidson talk show. So I was getting to meet everybody from, the Facts of Life girls to Donald O'Connor. And it was pretty heady stuff for me, pretty exciting. And that led to a job at a show called PM Magazine, which led to being offered by Rick Dees, who was a disc jockey in Los Angeles, to write his syndicated countdown show. So I moved from TV to radio, writing for Rick Dees, and then that led to me forming a company called Premier Radio Networks with some partners. And then that company went on and became a part of Clear Channel and iHeart and all of that stuff. So that kind of like, led me to spend most of my career in radio, getting really familiar with radio. And so as soon as podcasting became possible, I thought I'd like to do that. Like I liked, when technology was sort of shifting to where you could do it yourself. So whether it was filmmaking or podcasting, it sort of was like, or even like making music or writing a book, like all these things I've done, because I like the idea that, we can do it ourselves. And I love that. I love taking the thoughts in your mind and creating a thing. And, and Fritz has done that with his one-man shows, where you're not really reliant upon too many other people. And then podcasting allows you to sort of have an idea and put on a show in your barn. And that's kind of my story. With filmmaking, documentaries, I think you can do them yourselves. I wouldn't recommend it too much for, actors and scripts and all that, where you need a bunch of great people collaborating. But with docs, you can, it took me 8 years to make my documentary, but and I did need a lot of help and got a lot of help along the way. But I think a documentary is easier to pull off kind of than a feature or short. You could probably do a short.
Now, if I'm correct, you both actually had background in stand-up. You did as well, Louise. Is that correct?
Yes.
So a good stand-up, was a great sense of humor, but they also have a quick wit and affability as well. Does that also translate to being a good host, or are these two separate skills completely?
I think there's a lot of overlap.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. Wheezy, that's one of Wheezy's great skills, is fast on the uptake, very fast reactionary humor, reacting to whatever the surprising or otherwise that the guest says, and being able to have an interesting rejoinder or comeback for that. That's definitely a skill that can be honed in stand-up, because you're on a stand-up stage in front of drunks at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you develop a strong defense mechanism, which is often being quick on your feet. And that works in podcasting, and it's less threatening in podcasting.
Mm.
And really just also not always just being funny, but being able to respond in the moment and have something to say. In podcasting, you often have to be part of the conversation and be listening. In stand-up, you're kind of doing your act for the most part, unless something crashes in the kitchen or something that you have to react to. But in podcasting, it's more conversational, and I think Fritz and I both respond well to that. His weather career, he got to do a little bit of that, but he always had a lot more to say than what he was supposed to be saying when he's telling people whether or not to bring a jacket. And podcasting, as you've learned, you get to meet all kinds of fascinating people. You get to hear their stories. You get to see where there's kind of like all that human connection that we're all looking for as we walk through life, and just learn fascinating things about the world and each other.
Now, one thing about a stand-up comedian from the outside of you, because I've never been one, is that once again, as a stand-up comedian, you have the spotlight. Spotlight is yours. As a host, you're giving up the spotlight usually to your guest. Is that a hard thing to give up on, the spotlight, and giving it to a guest who's not one of you, who you don't know how they'll be, how they'll respond?
No, your job when you're a host is to make the guest look good. Your job as a stand-up is to survive and make yourself look good. The beauty of stand-up, the adrenaline rush of stand-up, is it's the most solitary endeavor you can ever engage in. These are thoughts you had on your own in the solace of your own home. They seemed amusing to you at the time. You go try them on a stage and they make an audience laugh. You are responsible for the content and the delivery. And so all of the reaction is yours. The reverse of that is when it doesn't go well, it's a very lonely experience. You're never out on a ledge that much being a podcaster, particularly when you have a great skilled co-host, because there's always somebody that will bail you out if you need it. But so it's slightly different.
I think it's a skill that you hone through life as being a good friend, being someone who listens, who's able to say the right thing that's comforting, or, ask the exact right next question that lets someone know that you've been paying attention to what they're going through and what they're conveying to you. And also at Premiere and at Rick D's, I interviewed a lot of celebrities, and I always would cut myself out. So the trick was to just do a lot of nodding and let people know that I was with them, but like not have my voice be something that I then have to edit out. So a lot of enthusiastic nodding, and asking the question that really gets them to tell an interesting story is the goal here.
And I will add one thing, and Wheezy will agree with this, that we were playing with one hand tied behind our back during the pandemic, because we had to do our interviews on Zoom. When we really have fun is when we can have a guest live in our great podcasting studio at Wheezy's house, and you're making eye contact, and there's a vibe in the room, and the reactions are crackly, and it really is a lot of fun. So we're just getting back to the point now where guests are coming over to the studio, and we're getting back to that. It's a little harder on Zoom because there's a slight disconnect, if you understand what I'm saying. It's not bad, it's just different. But we like the live interaction with people.
I agree with you that 100%. When I first started doing interviews, I did it on a different podcast, and they were audio only. And I did realize the difficulty with audio only is not be able to see the reaction of the person you're talking to, and especially not knowing when they're going to stop talking, because you feel like you tend more often to talk over them or through them. And I still do that from time to time on video, but because I'm still getting better at that. But it is better on video than it is audio only. And I must admit, I have never done an interview in person before, but I can just imagine how much better that must be of an experience.
Well, it's just like having a conversation with friends. There's no wall there, and you can read their nonverbal cues, and it's slightly different. We enjoy that, and hopefully, in the year 2065, when the pandemic is over, we'll have more of our guests in the studio.
Now, for a little while, from time to time on the other podcast, I've had a co-host interviewing a guest. And I will say that's one of the trickiest things I think I've ever done is have a co-host interviewing us. And I know you guys do your show together because, for one, the rhythm is a lot more difficult, timing who's going to talk, the questions you're going to ask, so you're not running over each other as well. And also a balance of question, make sure each one feels like they're equally involved. So as a team of co-hosts doing these interviews, how do you guys, where did the rhythm come from? How hard was that to get to? And how do you check beforehand what questions you're going to ask, make sure you're not going over each other, make sure you're not repeating each other, things of that nature?
Oh, that's a good question. We have pretty natural rhythm. We're in the studio together. We can look at each other, and Fritz will signal me if he wants to, if he's hearing something that inspires him to ask the next question. So it's pretty easy. We also apologize a lot.
Apologizing for talking over each other,
interrupting. Yeah.
Does it suck when your question is stolen?
You're right. The early part of your question is completely right. It takes a while to develop that rhythm and to trust the other person and to allow the other person to have the moment when they're having a better moment than you are. And that does take a while. Even when you're friends, it takes a while to get into that. But we've done a great job, and we get better all the time.
Does it kill yourself when it does hurt when you guys have a question the other person has asked that you wanted to ask? It's like, God damn it, I wanted that was mine. Or does that very rarely happen?
It doesn't happen for me. It's like our joint victory. If we ask good questions and have a good show, I'm always really happy and proud at how well Fritz prepares and how insightful his questions are. So it's a shared victory. That's how
and vice versa. That's right. It's the old Jack Benny, Johnny Carson school that if your guest is successful, it makes you look successful. So we just are happy if we get the questions out there that need to be asked and not be protective of who fired them off.
Well, I must have said, the guests that you've had on your show have been amazing. Like I said, Ira Shapiro, Henry Winkler, Vicki Lawrence. So how are these guests being chosen? Have you ever been intimidated by a guest that you thought to yourself, oh shit, I got, a really big get that makes it a little harder to do that interview? Or does the adrenaline just power you through?
I'd say I was most scared about Adam Schiff.
Yeah.
We're both political junkies, so I just was nervous. But I think we did really well. I think we did really well.
We did great. This was it that, the heat of the attention on him. It was right after his, he was the guy was it the second impeachment or the first? I can't remember which he did.
The first,
but
then he had written a book. He had written a book.
We were astonished that he would even have time in taking a moment out from saving democracy around the planet to come and talk to us on our podcast.
He has to talk to Fritz because Fritz is his constituent.
Yeah, it's true. I live in his area. And
like he's just racking up these votes one podcast at a time,
Right.
Well, like I said, I thought it was very cool, especially the interview with Ira Shapiro, that you do fight for ideals, for positive ideals. Politically, I'm totally in agreement with you guys. Do you ever concerned with having an audience split over something political that is being stated?
I feel like there's so many different podcasts that you can have, you can have a specific lane, sort of like a magazine stand. When I was a kid, you'd look at all the magazines like for some sort of motor trend and be like, that's not for me. I'm looking for Tiger Beat. You pick out what you want. And so I feel like it's okay, but we love our conservative friends. We had a lot of, conservative folks on, like, Pat Boone and the Oak Ridge Boys and all kinds of country acts. We love country music. We don't talk to them about politics because we don't want to say anything that they would find, they're a guest in our home. So when they come on, we're going to treat them with respect.
Do you ever have guests that want to come on the show that due to political or whatever reasons you decide not to have them on because either they wouldn't be a match for your show or your audience, or because wherever the topic would be inappropriate in your opinion?
Very seldom do we have somebody on purely for their politics. For instance, Pat Boone is not known for his politics. He's known because he was one of the great pop singers of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so we can avoid. Another example is Michael Reagan. Now, Michael, Wheezy's company syndicated his radio show, so she knew him previously. But it was very easy for us to avoid conservative Republican politics with him because he was so forthcoming and told some great stories about child abuse and having an odd, a very judgmental mom. We could have, as a matter of fact, we did. I don't think we ever talked about politics with him on there, but he was so interesting over and above the politics. But sometimes there are some nice surprises. John Bauman, Bowser from Sha Na Na was on, and I, only because of my lack of information about him, was astonished at how astute a political person he was. We had a fantastic hour conversation with him and even invited him back. I said, when we get closer to the midterms, will you come back and sort of be the color commentator? We'll talk about politics, because he was honestly one of the most well-read political observers of anybody we ever talked to. And we never even knew that's where we were going when we booked him. Cool. It was really cool.
Now, is that hard to adapt to when you thought you're going down one lane, you end up going a different lane? How quickly are you guys able to step into this other conversation when you think it's going down one road?
Well, we're pretty flexible, and also we do a bit of research. If the person hasn't written a book, we kind of thoroughly investigate what's available online about the person, so then we know they've been on previous shows, what topics they tend to want to discuss, and what matters to them in the world. People are very three-dimensional. There's more than one thing that matters to a person. We had on Christopher Knight from the Brady Bunch. He'll talk all day about the Bradys, but he also has had a whole life of all kinds of other pursuits that fascinate him. So yeah, I think we're pretty flexible with going where the conversation leads us.
It really makes for a fun hour or two when people take you down a path that you weren't expecting them to, and it just becomes fascinating on a human level. Christopher Knight, I think, is our most recent example of that. He was so good.
I think there's one thing I have learned from doing interviews and stuff, that everyone does have a story. I've had a few times where I've had a guest and I think to myself, I got nothing to say to this person for a reason. The person's been brought to me by a publicist or whatever. Hey, I need to talk to this person. I'm like, I don't know what to say to this person. And then as I do research, whatever, you do find there's always something the person has to say of worth saying. Is that something that you found universal with all your guests, that no matter that all of them, whether or not you thought they were someone who you would be able to have a long conversation with, you found that you would, or you did?
Yes, I think that we may not all feel like we're really fluent communicators, but we all have something that matters to us, and we all have probably hundreds of things that really matter to us. So it's really just a matter of, like, as an interviewer, what you're learning is you tap into, what matters to the person, and you will be surprised what they'll tell you.
Mm.
I have found, and I'm not as experienced in podcasting as Wheezy, but I have found that what really opens a guest up is the moment, and usually this is at the beginning of the interview, when they realize that you have taken an interest to be prepared. Let you do what Wheezy mentioned, which is to look up all their stuff, previous interviews online, all the YouTube stuff, or read their book, and they find out that you have a genuine interest. Then they're all yours. Then the questions can, be far apart because they just want to talk. And so just being prepared is a great way to sort of control the circumstances.
Now, do you guys prepare your questions, or do you just, or because you do your research, you don't need to have written questions beforehand?
We probably both have individual styles of preparation. I do create a rundown so that our tech guy can click on links, because we do a video show as well, as you do. And then I add all kinds of post-production visuals as I'm editing. But we like to have links that Thomas can click on. And so I prepare a rundown, and then I prepare about 10 questions, which I may or may not get to, just so that they're there. But we do like to have a conversational style to it. I'm not sure if Fritz, I know you take notes, and sometimes we have little prepared written paragraphs that we both will deliver, especially when we're doing recommendations at the top of the show. We like that to be well written and well sourced. But Fritz, how do you prepare? Do you actually write down questions?
No, I do write out questions, but not only in a podcast, but the key to being a good interviewer, whether you're a talk show host or, whatever your thing is to just listen and do the natural next question, not the one prepared, but just sort of what would be a natural follow-up question to the comment I just heard from this person. So if you can do that, it seems more conversational. But I like to give myself the ammo of 15 or 20 prepared questions. Whether I get to them or not doesn't matter, but it makes me feel more confident going in when I have all those written.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm closer to you. I gotta have my questions on hand. I must say, maybe it's more from your stand-up background that I tend to be a little slower coming up with great questions versus having something written. I do wonder if stand-up is, you're just quicker at responding to audiences.
Yes, I think stand-up prepares you for that. But also, a little preparation is good, because you can be thoughtful in preparing something that you think will draw out an interesting answer, and you can think quick on your feet, but you don't always have that really astute observation when you're just going off your wits all the time. It helps to have a few things written out. I like to have a few things written out.
Well, like yesterday, for example, we interviewed Lord Jacobson, who's written a book about the Beatles at Shea Stadium, and Fritz had prepared kind of like sort of a time capsule of what the world was facing at the moment that the Beatles appeared at Shea. And that was like a nice moment in the show where he kind of laid out the framework of, this is what the world looked like the moment this event happened, and things like that. I think coming to the show prepared in that fashion is not only is it fun, it's also really helpful, and it also lets the guests know that you've really plugged into what they came to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there a line or a difference between asking the questions that you want to know about, or the questions that the guest wants to talk about, or that you think the audience wants to hear?
We never have interview subjects submit questions they would like us to ask. A good publicist will often send us maybe a list of areas that are ripe for questioning, but we never get specific questions. We don't need to do that because we're prepared. And second of all, it would be really boring. And these are usually questions that these people have been asked 74 times in every press junket they've been to. So we don't mind having areas, because it often can turn a rock over and uncover some interesting part of their life that we might not otherwise know. But we don't like the prepared questions that we don't prepare.
And if someone's written a book, then they're loaded with stories.
Mhm.
And they've got a book's worth of stories, because the editor would have sent it back and said, keep going and add, and so they're never going to get to all the stories that are in the book. And so it's just giving people sort of thumbnails about, what to expect if they open the book and start to read. And usually the authors love telling some of the stories that are in their book, and sharing, what you're going to find if you go ahead and purchase the book.
Mhm.
Now, when you guys are doing these interviews as well, where's the line between information, entertainment, and promotion? Because obviously every guest there is there as, to promote something usually. Is that a difficult line to find as well between talking, getting information on the kind of what you want them to talk about, what they want to promote, and obviously, entertaining as well?
I mean, I think
information and entertainment is our key. That's what we want to do. And then we give them plugs at the beginning of the introduction, at the end. We give them, a reasonable amount of plugs. That's not the only reason they're on there. But if we find it interesting, then people understand why we're plugging their product at the beginning and the end of our interview.
I mean, what I find is that you're not really advertising if you're giving people what they wanted in the first place. So when you are presenting ideas as to what folks would find entertaining, then that's the stuff that they go Googling for, even with or without you. So you're really just giving them ideas, and they can take them or leave them. But it doesn't feel like advertising. When I see something that I want to know about, I'm happy that it came across my screen. I don't feel like I'm being, sold the same diet pills or, something that is ridiculously not my thing. But like with entertainment, we're simply giving people suggestions about the sort of stuff that we're all looking for every day. Every single person is a consumer of entertainment. So I think we're just sharing ideas. Of course we want to help the guests, and it's always a hand washing hand kind of situation. The guests want to be on a podcast and they want to sell their book, and then people want a book that is going to be interesting. They want a podcast that is going to be interesting. They want a show recommendation that is going to be interesting. So to me, it just feels like we're all helping one another.
Mm-hmm.
So I read that Media Path now has reached 100 episodes, which is, congratulations on that. That's a huge milestone to have hit. So well done, everybody. So how has your show evolved in those 100 episodes?
Well, I think we've evolved in a couple of ways. We're expanding our reach. We're getting publicists and marketing people to trust us. When you first start, a publicist wants to earn his money by directing their clients to people who are going to do their clients some good. And so we need to be trusted. So what we've done over this year and a half, almost 2 years, is we've gotten publicists to feel safe with us, that they can trust their clients, people who are very famous or people who are not so famous. But we've gotten PR people to trust us. So we're starting to see more frequent placements of interview subjects by various clients. And we've spread our reach. I mean, this week, I think our producer told us, tell me the countries, Wheezy, we've spread out. We're getting listeners in Norway now, and we had other European countries. So we're slowly spreading our reach, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, we're a big deal in Norway and Bosnia. So
where do you think you see your show going the next 100 episodes?
We'd love to have more in-studio guests, but I think it's just going to sort of continue. The media landscape keeps evolving, and we're just going to keep reacting to that and giving people more of what they want to know about. And yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, but it's hard to predict the future. I hope we'll be together. People will be together more, and that we'll be less nervous about being around each other. I'm currently, I am in the throes of COVID. So, I had the nerve of going on a cruise, and being around folks. And the universe said, oh, no, you don't, and sent me home with COVID. So, it's definitely still a concern. Everybody wants to feel safe and healthy. We like having conversations with people in person, but also, through this pandemic, our habits have changed. People have, thought about getting in the car and going somewhere, and they're like, why would I do that? I have Grubhub. I can just stay here and go on Zoom. So yeah, it's shift, we're all shifting the way in which we function, but hopefully we could have more. Maybe we'll have some remote equipment and Fritz and I can go to you with our conversation.
That's awesome.
I would like to see us expand our influence. And I use Mark Maron as an example. When President Obama was running for re-election, he did the Mark Maron podcast, and it was a game changer. I would love people in the political arena or in the entertainment arena that see the value of coming on, and we make them look good and they know they're going to have an interesting conversation. I'd like to be a go-to venue for those people. And that may be a wild dream, and it may be a distance in the future, but that would be one of my hopes.
Well, I agree with Fritz. I'd love to have more political guests as we get closer and closer to the midterms. I think it'd be an honor to help become part of the solution.
I always wanted to get political guests on my show, but so far I've yet to be successful in doing that. I don't know, maybe the name is, well, that's if we don't have the guests, but it's sort of like a ladder approach is what I call it. Sort of like one level of guests and you build upon that level and so forth and so on.
Exactly.
Have you noticed the same thing with politicians, that you get one like politician like entry level, then you kind of get the next one is more safe coming on and they feel safe and so forth and so on?
With politicians, it's like
politicians, but all of our guests, it sort of builds that way.
Yeah. With politicians, you have to find a window, and they, their schedules are constantly shifting. So it's a little bit tricky because we do our show consistently every Tuesday at 3:00 because we have our crew present and everything. But we'd love to have anybody, campaign staffers or anyone who's part of, sort of a political campaign or activism. We'd love to have all kinds of folks on to talk about.
We invited the security guard from Mar-a-Lago, but he hasn't returned our call.
Yeah, he's gag order, this guy right there. Yeah. We'll just fly over Mar-a-Lago like with a plane and a banner and says like, if you have info, please call Media Path Podcast.
Have you ever considered having a Republican on and be able to grill them on the show, or would that be against what do we say the morals of your show would be, which is not to sabotage a guest?
I mean, I feel like maybe we could. I mean, Pete Buttigieg is really good at just sort of taking these guys on, but like they're all such liars. I'm so polite. It's just tricky. I don't know, Fritz. How would you feel about it?
No, I don't. I'll tell you why. There's so many talking head shows where it's people arguing back and forth. I think we would just be another part of the cacophony of noise out there that they're already getting on cable television. I would rather have somebody that I disagree with politically and have them on and just gently talk about what led them to their absurd beliefs. So.
Is that the way you'd frame it?
Yeah.
Why are you such a maniac?
Come up with this bullshit in the first place.
I've been mostly I've been surprised that most of the guests I've had on have all been liberal. Is not something I tend to look into. The once or twice I've had a guest who I didn't know what the politics were, and then right before they came on, when I researched, I was like, oh shit, and I kind of bailed out of the politely bailed the interview because I was like, well, I'm not taking on something about anti-vax, pro-Trump. I was just like, and I kind of sent a nice message saying, unfortunately, I'm going to cancel the interview, blah blah blah. But it might be awkward if that had happened during the interview.
Well, we've never had to do that because their politics was never the primary reason why they were invited on the show. If we found that, and we've discovered that, Weezy and I will text one another the night before and said, do you know this guy was formerly in the John Burke Society or something like that? And so what we'll do is we'll just talk about what, got them on the show in the first place and completely avoid politics.
Well, we have had some interesting, I will say that as much as I, think that Republicans are currently an extreme, authoritarian leaning party that's gotten dangerously close to the edge of a cliff, a lot of my dearest friends and associates are conservatives, and they've, sort of gone along with that program. And I'm not going to stop loving them just because I think that they're being lied to. But Fritz and I had on Gary Puckett, and we were talking about music. and there was some sort of oil spill or some kind of toxic spill in Florida. And Gary said, "Oh, we're not worried because we have such a good governor." And Fritz and I just went, boing.
Whoa,
We didn't
The
see
oxygen
anything
left
because
the
we love
room.
Gary. We love Gary. Why would I, I'm not
No,
gonna
no,
engage.
didn't require a follow-up question. People at home made up their own minds about that. And he was a fantastic guest who's had a wonderful career. So again, it goes back to my point. That's not the reason we invited them on. If they happen to launch down that rabbit hole while they're there, we can steer them out of it.
Is it hard sometimes to bite your tongue in those situations when you know what you want to say, you have that itch to follow up on something and then kind of be like, let's just not go down that? Or how good are you at anticipating the roads not to go down?
It's really easy. If someone's politics don't align with mine, I'm not going to discuss politics with them. And this is my policy is the same on Facebook. If I post something on Facebook and one of my Facebook friends comes in with something political that's right wing that I think is wrong headed, I ignore it. They want me to engage, and I don't like it. I don't like to come back to a Facebook post and find my friends fighting with each other. So I kind of reserve politics for Twitter, where I don't know anybody. And on Facebook,
And our show's not a political debate.
yeah, it's not.
I mean, we can avoid politics completely on our show. And the thing about it is, if you say something as a contentious rejoinder to somebody that makes a comment, even if it's outrageous, it's going to slam the door on the rest of the conversation. And so, you just let them float it out there. You take a beat, and people at home are absorbing it on their own level, and get back to talking about their book about, all the black keys on the piano or something. I don't know.
Well, as someone who's a podcaster as well, there's a line between doing well in podcasting and then the other side of it is promoting. How hard has it been, or how have you navigated the land of promoting yourselves and your own show?
I don't like.
We hired a PR lady who's doing a magnificent job.
Yeah, it's why we're on your show.
So, I mean,
It's true.
Well, like I said, I do know the publicist, and she's a fantastic lady, and you did pick a good one from my experience.
Oh no, she's been great. She's kept us very busy. We get to meet a diverse group of audiences like yours, and get to have chats with you in Rhode Island, and that's really cool. And hopefully we'll gradually make friends that way. It's hard to do it on your own. I mean, you can't just promote on social media because people's response is kind of spotty. But when you have somebody out there grinding away and somebody that knows the whole landscape like Lori does, it's always good.
How do you do it, Jeff?
I have to self-promote. I used to have a team around me, but now I'm virtually a one-man show. So I promote through social media, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, Facebook groups. I must be in like 700-800 Facebook groups now for different, anytime I get a guest, and depending on what their background is, I join all the Facebook groups surrounded that person, and then I post and post and post. And I probably come close to becoming a spammer, but it's kind of the only way I can come up with.
Well, that's a good way to do it,
That's
because then
great.
you're focusing on people of that similar interest.
Yeah, and if you kind of like, that's kind of like your thing, and you like gaming it and figuring it out, and you're approaching it like analytically, that's wonderful. I mean, good for you.
Trying to. Actually, this show's been around now since November, so I'm almost at the year, growing decently. But I will say it's tough. I mean, one thing I have learned about podcasting is that I have no idea which shows are going to be successful. I've had guests that have been positive or are going to be massive hits, and they don't get a lot of hits, and then I've had guests who never thought they'd be huge and they blow up. And I must admit, I've learned I have no idea. I just promote everyone equally.
I've had a similar feeling to you. You never know.
No, yeah, it's interesting with our show. We never know what guests are going to be popular. One of our most popular guests was Butch Patrick from the Munsters, because Munsters has like a huge kind of like cult following. So
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say I've noticed that. Like I said, there's a few times, and in my head I try to come up with guess the number. This will get this many views, that many views, and the amount of times I've been wrong are way. I'm glad I'm not a baseball player, because I would not make it to the major leagues with my percentage of guessing.
No, I know. Figuring it out is impossible. The thing to do is, I learned this in television. You know, there are people on TV that obsess over overnight ratings, the Nielsen ratings, or the rating sweeps, and they obsess and they parse the numbers and everything. And all that does is make you insane. I've learned that you just do the best job you can, and this pays off in podcasting as well. Just do the best job you can and try to continue to build. And if it will happen, it will happen. But making yourself crazy by thinking about the number of people who are not listening to your podcast is very unhealthy in a mental way. So
I think my wife would agree with you.
yeah.
I must say, I definitely I probably have a slightly unhealthy obsession with knowing what my view count is any given day. Unfortunately, I have YouTube, I can't remember what they call it. YouTube Buddy, I think they call it, where they constantly can gives you the updates. And I must say, I unfortunately have probably hit refresh way more frequently than I should have.
I can't do that. It just makes me sad.
So how do you guys then distance yourself from that kind of stuff? And what is success defined by you two on an episode?
Well, for me, I think there's probably a happy medium somewhere between you and me, Jeff, where the person studies it and then applies what they've learned. You know, I'm like Fritz, I just kind of run from it because I think I'm afraid that it will discourage me. But I probably, you know, we do have a social media manager, Dina Friedman, who's looking out for that part of it. So it's not like I'm like completely neglecting it, but I also feel like, you know, as a creative, for me and Fritz, probably it's easier to just do the best possible show and then hire the best possible people to help you promote the best possible show and let it take off from there. But I probably should be paying closer attention to the stats than I do, because you can learn from the stats, and, you know, stats teach us, and they're a barometer as to, you know, what we could improve. I'm wondering if you found any kind of like patterns in terms of like shows that do well.
I have found a few patterns. One thing I have learned slightly off the pattern thing is that Facebook promotions, sponsored promotions are not worth shit. I've learned that over and over again, that paying Facebook to promote your episode is worthless in every instance I've ever done it. I mean, even in the short term or long term, it doesn't work. What I do learn is that the deeper the fan base, the better the show. I do very well with Star Trek, Orville, anything that has a deep built-in fan base, and they'll promote me for me. In other words, if I post on Twitter, hashtag whatever, they'll pick up my show and do the promotion for me, and basically retweeting everything else and talking about it. The more obscure the item, sort of like if I have a good actor in a movie no one's heard of, it does not do as well as a no-name actor in a show people know. And I've learned that. I've had actors, some who are very well known, talking about things that don't have a fan base because they were in just kind of like a random movie. The shows don't do as well as the 10th credited individual on this fan base product. And that I've noticed as well is that you gotta follow the fan base, at least until the audience. The way what I've talked about is the idea is right now my show is guest driven. The guest is now dictating how well the show does. I want to get to the point where my show is me driven. They're coming to see just my show. I'm not there yet. So right now I got to follow the guest and where their fan base is.
I think we have a similar desire.
Yes.
But to go back to your earlier question, Wheezy and I really love it when we've had a good show with somebody that really crackled, and we come off the show with a little adrenaline rush, and we high five and say that was fun. And we take the success of that individual interview as what we take away from it, which is fun.
So kind of connected to that, we mentioned a little bit of social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And what I kind of begin to realize is that now that I'm a host and I'm kind of representing my guests as well, I got to be more careful with what I say on social media. I kind of have to be more careful about if I want to, like, I do a lot of television and also comic books as well. I got to be careful about slamming a product because I might get that guest on my show at some point in the future. Like, I kind of have to be like modeled what I said. Do you find because of your show, you got to be more careful about what you say on social media and so it does not reflect on the show, or you keep them totally separate entities?
I always believe that you should never put anything in writing that you wouldn't want on the front page of the New York Times. So I don't write anything cruel. I don't call anyone names. I have, a few political thoughts that I'll convey on Twitter, but I tend not to say anything that's going to be uncomfortable for somebody to read. If I'm angry at a situation or something like a line at an airport, I might take a picture of the line and say Frankfurt Airport sucks, because I know that's not one person. That's just my.
But you don't do that to protect media path. That's just because that's the kind of person you are, which is
exactly. So that's just what Fritz is saying is like, that's my personal style. So I feel that I don't have to really kind of edit myself just because I have a podcast, because I tend to, really believe in online kindness as something that we could all stand to improve upon. Don't send an email until you've read it thoroughly and maybe slept on it. There's just there's nothing positive that comes from venting rage on the internet. So that's just kind of like something that I personally, adopted early on, because if you write an angry email, then you have to now be afraid to open your emails because the person's going to come back at you twice as hard. So like, do I want to be involved in that, that conversation, or do I want to have said something that diffused somebody else's, bitterness by saying something? Oh, I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood you. Let's see if we can get on the same page here. I try to say things that are calming, and that's just the general way that I move through the world. But I guess what you're saying is, if it does a podcaster have more responsibility for their brand, when they're being themselves online? It's a good question.
Very cool. And just one last question. So the episodes come out regularly on a certain day and time, or do they come out sporadically?
Very, very consistent. We record the show on Tuesdays. I edit the shows on Wednesdays, post the shows on Thursdays. So, by Thursday at 4:00, the show has been posted. So if you subscribe, you're going to see a new show in your feed every Thursday. And we just took a month off because I had to go catch COVID. I was busy. And and now we're probably going to be consistently posting for quite some time. We're not going to take another break for a little bit here.
All right, fantastic. And for my listeners,
Thank you so much, Jeff. Good job.
Great job. Thank you so much,
Nice
Jeff.
talking to you, Jeff.